In my team, I want the chicken. Today's video is not the most interesting one, but we have to do it. And before we are able to add the units in the combat, we have to put them in teams. Because our game is not going to be a 1v1, it's going to be a team of units versus a team of units. So we have to build them. And that's what we're going to do today. So let's get to it. So in our game, we're not going to have a limit of teams that we can have. We can have as many teams as we want, either 2, 8, 74 if we want to. But we're mostly going to keep it under 8 for sure, but we can do whatever we want. But what's important is to identify the teams. So the first way we're going to identify them is with the index. So we're gonna have the index of the team, so index 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, until your maximum index. And then we're going to have a color, because it's going to be simpler visually to identify them with a color than a number. So let's go do that first. We're going to assign an index to a color so we can match them together later on. So I'm gonna go in my blueprint core combat folder, and I will create myself a new utilities folder in there to create a new function library. So right click, blueprint function library, which is going to be named BFL_combat, and I'm going to use it to create all the utilities function we're gonna use for our combat system. So let's open that one. And here's the function. So I simply named it get the team color because it's going to be taking an index, so an integer, as input and convert it to a color associated with that team. So the logic is super simple. If the index is equal to -1, it means that it's probably an invalid index, or the unit is not in a team already, or things like that. So that's why I'm just returning black right here at the end, if it's the case. Otherwise, I'm just using a select to choose which color I want to use for that specific team index. So I have blue, red, green, purple, orange, whatever. You can use the colors you want. In my case, I've added 8 colors, but you can have as many as you want. If in your game you only want to have 2 teams maximum, well, you can just add 2 colors in there. If you want 4, 6, whatever, you can choose as many colors as you want. So here we go. That's the logic of the function. We take an index as input, and then we return a linear color at the end. I'm just going to also make it pure so it's simpler to call, and now we can compile and save the function library, and we actually can close it because we don't have any other functions to add in there. And actually, since we are already in that folder, I'm just going to take a bit of time to create a new blueprint structure. So blueprint structure, which I'm gonna name s_unit set. We're gonna use that today in this video just to organize our units, because it's not really possible to put a list of units inside another list, and I think that's what we want to do for the unit teams. We're gonna see that a little bit later, but for now we're just going to create the structure since we're here. So here we go. I have my structure as a unit set. It's going to be only containing one variable, which is going to be of type VP unit. I'm just going to name it unit set. And for the container of our unit, I'm going to use a set. So here we go, a set of unit. You can use an array if you want to. The difference between an array and a set is just that we can only have one time each element inside the set. So in our case, it makes sense because the unit can only be in the team only once. We cannot be in the same team multiple times. That doesn't make sense. So that's why I'm using a set in this case. Here we go. Now we can save and close the unit set. Here we go. And now the first step is every time we have a unit and we want to add it on top of the grid or in combat, we also have to tell it in which team we want to place it, and that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna assign a team index every time we are adding a unit in combat. So let's go where we are adding the units in combat. So in the debug menu, we have our action and we have the button action add remove unit from combat. So let's open that one. And we're simply going to start by adding a spin box with name in the widget. That way we can select which team we want to assign to the unit. So here is my spin box. So I have my team spin box right here. The min max value are going to be 0 and 3. So we are only going to support 4 teams in this slider, but you can add as many teams as you want. So this slider here, you can set the maximum as high as you want. So 1, 2, 5, 10, you can decide. The default value is going to be 0, so the default team is going to be the index 0, obviously, and then the frag digit are going to be 0 because it's not a float, it's only an integer. The always snap to delta is true, and the delta is going to be 1, so only incrementing by 1 at a time. Perfect. Now we can go in the graph to assign this index to the unit when we are adding it on top of the grid. So here with the spin box selected, I can implement the event at the beginning and connect it with the other ones, just like that. Then we have the visibility, so I can take my spin box and connect it in both visibilities to tweak that visibility also. And then we can go at the end right here when we are setting the variables in the action itself. Right now we don't have a variable for it, so we're gonna have to go create it because we have the value of the spin box right there and we just have to feed it to the action, but right now it's not possible. So let's go create it. I'm gonna go in my entry, gonna go in core, player action, action combat, and then I'm going to open add remove unit from combat and create myself right here a new variable for the team index. And here it is, so a team index, and it is an integer, and now I can go back in my button to feed it to my action. So here it is, I have my team index that I'm setting using the value of the spin box. Perfect, now we can compile and save the button because we're done with it, and now we can simply continue the flow inside the action. And here the next step is to feed the team index inside the add unit in combat that we have right here. Because we have the index, we want to feed it to the combat system. So let's open the function and create ourselves a new input at the beginning, which is going to be an integer, which is going to be the team index. Perfect, let's compile the combat system, go back in the action and connect to the team index, just like that. Now we can compile, save the action and close it because we're done with it and we can continue the flow in the combat system. And now that we are in the combat system, we can take the unit and place it inside the team. But it's not as simple as that, because we don't want the unit to be first in multiple teams at the same time, maybe, or we want to make sure that the units end up in the right team, or maybe notifying the unit in the case that it has a few things to change when it is placed inside a new team. For example, the color, we're gonna do that later on. But yeah. We have multiple steps to do when we want to place a unit inside a team. So I'm just going to create a new function for it. So a new function, set unit team index, and it's going to take as input two parameters. So first the BP unit for the unit, which I'm going to name unit, and then we have an integer for the team index. And here it is, but before doing the logic of the function, I'm just going to go in the other function just to call this function, and then we can focus on the logic. So the two places we need to call this function is first in the add unit in combat, because we are adding a unit in the combat, so we want to tell it, okay, this is your team now. So I'm going to call it at the end right here. So set unit team index, passing it to the unit and the team index, just like that. And then the second place that we want to call this function is when we are removing the unit from the combat. So remove unit from combat right here. The unit is on the grid, is in a team, but before we remove the unit from the combat, we are just going to tell it, okay, you're not in a team anymore. So I'm going to pass it -1 as input, just so we now know that the unit is not in the combat. So perfect. Now the unit was removed from the grid and from the combat, and we can go do the logic of the function. And here I said that we have to add a bunch of codes to check multiple things before setting the index to the unit. But since I just want to test it and see and make sure that the index goes through and goes from the interface all the way to the unit, I'm just going to directly feed it to the unit just to be able to test it real quick. So I'm gonna go in entry and open my BP unit. So in units, we can open the BP units. And then I'm going to create a new function to set the team index. And I also added an integer as input, which is the index we want to set, obviously. And what I'm going to do is take that index and promote it to a variable. So here it is. I have my new variable, a set team index, which is saved just right here. And now we would like to be able to see if it works, because we don't really have a way to see if it works unless we are debugging with breakpoints and everything. But what we're going to do is if I go back in the viewport, oh, actually we don't see it, but we have the HP bar right here, which has a color. Right now it's red. So let's just change the color of the HP bar to represent the color of the team index using the function we used at the beginning of the video. So that's going to be pretty simple to do. So to do that, I'm just going to get my HP bar, which is right here, and then get the progress bar inside the HP bar to set the fill color and opacity. So we can change the color of the progress bar, in which we're simply feeding the get team color right here that we created at the beginning. So here we go. I have my team index getting the color, feeding it to the progress bar. And now we can go call this function inside the combat system just to be able to test and see if it works. And that's super simple. We just have to set the team index just like that. Here we go. Now we can compile and go see in game how it looks. So now if I select my add remove unit action, we should now have the team index progress bar under it. So here we go, it works. And if I add it in the game, we can see that now the progress bar on top of the unit's head. So the HP bar is now blue because it corresponds to the color of my team. And if I change my team, here we go, I have red progress bars, then I have green if I change my team again, and finally the fourth team is going to be purple. Here we go. So now the team index are working and they are passed through all the way from the widget to the units. Great. Now we can stop the game and go in the combat system to do the real logic of the function. And the first thing we're going to need is a new variable to keep track of all of our teams. So I'm going to go right here on the left and create myself a new variable, which I'm going to name unit teams. And it's going to be a mapping from an integer to a unit set that we created at the beginning. And it is really going to be a mapping from the team index to all the units that are inside that team. And we're going to build this function in 3 steps. So first step is to remove the unit from the previous team if it was already in another team. Then we're going to add the unit inside the new team we want to set it in. And then the final step is going to set the team index on the unit itself. So what I'm going to do is just move my set team index right here at the bottom to give us a little bit more room to do the first 2 steps. So sequence, first step, second step, and then the third step is going to be to set the index on the unit. And now for the first step, which is to remove the unit from the current team, well, we have to first check if the unit is part of a team. So if the team index of the unit is not equal to -1, it means that the unit is already inside a team and we have to remove it from it. So let's say the current unit is inside a team. So let's remove it. I'm gonna go here, and what we're gonna do is first get the team itself. So I'm gonna fetch in my unit teams to get the team index, which is going to return us the unit set of all the units that are inside that team. And then we can just set it inside a local variable. So I have my unit set right here, which then I can modify. So if we want to modify that variable, we have to put it inside a local variable and then re-update it inside the mapping. That's how Blueprint works. So here it is, I have my local variable, and what I can do is remove the unit from the set. So I have my unit, I can remove it. Here we go. The unit is not part of the team anymore. But then we have to re-update the variable inside the mapping, as I said. So what we're going to do is go a little bit on the right again, and we're first going to check if there's still units inside that team, because we just removed one. What if it was the last one? Well, we don't really want to keep track of that team anymore. The team is empty, we don't need to worry about it anymore. So what we're going to do is, if the team length is still greater than 0, so if there's still a unit in the team, we're going to update it in the mapping. So I'm going to take my unit teams and re-add my unit set and my team index. So we're going to put back the team inside the unit teams. But in the case that the team is empty, so the length is not greater than 0, so it's probably equal to 0, we're simply going to remove the team from the unit team. So we're not going to worry about it anymore. It's not going to exist anymore. We're just going to remove the team completely. So that's what we're doing right here. Unit teams, remove team index. Here we go. So now the unit was removed from the previous team. We now just have to add it inside the new team. So I'm just going to go back at the beginning, and in the second branch of my sequence, I'm going to start by checking if the team index that we received as input is valid. So if it is not equal to -1, it probably means that we want to add the unit inside another team. If it's equal to -1, it's probably because we just want to destroy the unit or remove it from all the teams in the combat or things like that. But in the case that the team index is valid, it means that we want to add it inside a new team, and that's what we're gonna do. So if the team index is valid, we're gonna continue on the right and do the same thing we did right here. So create a copy of the unit set coming from the unit teams, so then we are able to modify it, and that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna take the unit and put it inside that new team. Here we go. Now the only thing we need to do is to re-update the mapping, because we only updated the local variable. So we're just going to do that like this. So unit teams, add the team index and the unit set inside it. Here we go. So now all of our unit teams are updated. The unit was removed from the previous team and added inside a new team. And then if we go back at the beginning, we're going to make sure that we then set the team index on that unit the same way we did before. So we are removing it from a team, adding it to a new team, and then updating the team index on the unit itself. And the last thing I'm going to do inside this function is to create myself a new callback that is going to be called every time the unit's team are going to change, because I'm pretty sure that if this happens, if the unit change team in the middle of the combat, the game is going to adapt itself. It needs to, because it's going to change the whole logic of the game. So that'd be weird if it doesn't. So we're just going to add ourselves a new callback right here. So a new event dispatcher, which I'm going to name onUnit teams changed, in case that in the future we want our game to react when the unit teams are changing. So if the unit change teams, we're just going to tell the game, okay, the teams were updated, update yourself. And that's actually it. That's everything we needed to do to manage the unit teams in the combat. The mechanic is done, it's ready to be used, and we can go to the next step. But before ending to this video, I think it will be a good time to just update the debug menu a little bit, add some extra features in there to be able to see all the unit teams at the same time and have more feedback on what is happening in the game, and also to add some extra feature to be able to change the team of a unit that is already on the grid, because right now we are only able to set the team when we are adding the unit on top of the grid, but it will be also nice to change it once the unit is on the grid. So we're going to do that also, and we're also going to create the tab that we're going to use in the next few videos, which is the tab for the combat system. So let's go back in entry and go do that. So I'm going to go in my debug menu, in my tabs, and I'm going to duplicate the tab spells because it's the simplest one, and then I'm going to rename it tab_combat, and we can open it, and in there I'm just going to delete everything I'm not going to use. So the button show spell range and also the cast spell. Here we go. So now we're left with that simple action tab right here, and we're actually going to go add it directly in the debug menu. So I'm going to go back in entry, go in my debug menu and open the debug menu right here. I'm going to duplicate one of my buttons and I'm going to rename it. So it's written combat on the button, and I'm also going to rename the button itself. So button combat. Here we go. Now we can add the tabs to the widget switcher right here. So I'm going to search for my tab combat, and I did add it at the end of the widget switcher right here. Here we go. That's my new tab combat. Perfect. We can compile the designer and go in the graph. Right here we have the update button color function. So I'm just going to add my button in there so the color is updated. So I'm going to take my button combat right here and add it to the make array so its color is updated. And then the last thing we have to do is to implement the unclicked event. So I'm going to select my button combat, implement the unclicked event, and set the new tab index that we want to use. So the tab index for the tab combat is going to be the index 6 because we added it at the end, and the last one before that was 5. So here we go. Now we can compile and save the debug menu, and we're done with it. And we can actually go see in game to see if it worked. So I have my new tab at the top, the tab combat, and when I click on it, it opens the tab combat widget. Perfect. Now we can stop and go do the rest of the tab combat. And here we're going to start by adding ourselves a new action. So I'm going to add the add remove unit from combat action because I think it makes sense that this action is also part of the combat tab. So here we go. It's right there. I'm going to add a bit of padding, and here it is. So now we are able to add and remove units from the combat inside the combat tab, which makes sense. Perfect. But now what I said is that we wanted to also have a way to change the unit team from a unit that is already spawned in combat, and now we don't have that possibility anywhere in the game, so we're gonna have to create a new action for it. So I'm gonna go in my action, in my player action combat, and I'm going to duplicate action underscore add remove unit from combat, and then I'm just going to rename it action underscore set unit team index, and then we're going to open that one and change a few things because it's going to be pretty different. And what I'm going to do is go in the execute action and actually delete everything because we're going to start from scratch. We're going to keep the team index variable, so I can delete both of those because they are not needed anymore. Here we go. And for the logic of the action, it's super simple. We just have to first check if there's a unit on the tile that we just clicked. So if the index that we received as input, if there's a unit on that tile, well, we want to change the team index, and that's how we're going to do that. Simply call the setUnitTeamIndex function inside the combat system. Then we can simply pass it the unit from the grid tiles and also the team index from the variable on the left. And that's it. The action is done. So now we can compile, save the action, close it. And now back in the tab combat, we're going to need a new button to set the team index. So we're going to create one. So let's go in our buttons right here. So in the debug menu, in the actions button, I'm going to duplicate button action, add remove unit from combat, and rename it button action, set unit team index also, and then open it to modify it. And the first thing we're going to change is what's written on the button. So I'm going to rename it set unit team index instead of what was there before. And then we can update both actions. For the right click, we don't need any action, so let's put it to none. And for the left click, we're going to select the action set unit team index. Here we go. Then we're not gonna need the unit list right here because we're not gonna set any unit types. We're just going to set the theme. Now we can compile save and there's a few bugs. So let's go fix them in the graph right here. I'm gonna start at the beginning. We're not using the button list anymore. It's not there. So let's delete that one. We don't need the event. And then on the right, we have the button list units right here, which doesn't exist anymore. So we can delete it also. And then we can go at the end right there. We're not gonna have any action on the right click, so we can delete that second part, and then we can actually delete everything right here because we're gonna use a new action class. So we're gonna need a new cast. So let's do that cast right here. So cast action set theme index, which we just created, and then from that we can set the unit theme. Actually, set index. Here we go, set theme index. Perfect, we can connect it like so, and we're done with this widget. Now we can compile it, save it, close it, and then go back in the tab combat to add it inside it. So I have my button action set theme indexed, which we can simply drag at the end of the vertical box, and then we can add 2 of padding just so it fits with the other ones. Perfect, now we can compile save, and we can go see in game if the action works. So in the tab combat, I'm going to add a few units. So I have a few units here. In the other themes, I'm gonna add a few other units. Here we go. And now with the action set theme index, let's see if we can change the theme index. Here we go. I can change them to purple now. And then what if I change them to red? It seems to work also. So we can now change the theme index of the units that are already on the grid. Perfect. We're done with that. We can stop and then go back in the tab combat because there's one other thing that I would like to add in there. And the thing that I want to add is just a way to display all the teams that are active in the game. So if we have the team 0 and 5 that are active and units inside them, we're going to display them in a list in the debug menu. So we know at any time which units are in which team. So let's do that real quick. I'm gonna start by duplicating my border to have another category right here at the bottom. And I'm actually just going to delete all the buttons that are in there because we're not gonna use them. We're gonna replace them by the unit list. And then instead of the action name, I'm going to rename it the teams. Here we go. So now we have a place to display all of our themes. And here in our components, the first thing I'm going to do is replace the vertical box by a scroll box. So I'm going to right click replace with scroll box. That way, if the length of our theme, so if there's too many units in the themes, we'll be able to scroll through them, which is fine. And then we're also going to limit the height of our theme list because if we have, let's say, 10,000 units in the theme, we don't want it to go all the way off the screen. So let's just right click on the scroll box, wrap with, and choose a size box. Here we go, size box. And then we are going to change the max desired height to 300. So we are going to limit the maximum height of our scroll box. Here we go. So it's just going to go, let's say, to here instead of all the way down at the bottom of the screen. Okay, inside the scroll box, I'm going to add an horizontal box with some text in it. So here it is. I have my horizontal box right here at the top, and then I have a few numbers. So I have my text theme 0, which is a text component written 0 on it. And then I have the same thing for 1, 2, 3. So we have all 4 themes we want to display right here, and they are just numbered. So here on the right, I don't have much change. I just have the size to be 16, and then the justification is centered, and that's it. Everything else is as default. Here we go. So now we're done with the theme indexes. Then we're gonna add a grid panel inside the scroll box after the theme indexes. So here it is. I have my grid panel, unit themes. Here it is. We're going to add all the units inside that grid panel. The column is going to be based on the theme index, and then the row is just going to be the order in the theme. Right here on the right, I have my horizontal alignment to be filled. My vertical alignment is at the top. And then in the field rules, I have my column fill, which I added 4 elements in there. That way, it's going to always have 4 columns in it. So 1, 2, 3, 4 columns. Perfect. So that's it for the components. Make sure that this grid panel is a variable right here in the top right corner because we're going to add dynamically the units in there. And I've also made the same thing for all the text component right here. They are all variables because we're going to change the color so it matches with the color of the theme. Perfect. Now we can go in the graph to do the logic. And let's start with the color of the text. So in the pre-construct, we're gonna make an array with all of our text components. So we have text theme 0, 1, 2, 3 right here. We're putting them inside an array so we are able to loop through them. So we're gonna loop through all the text and assign a color to it. To determine the color, we're gonna use the get team color, passing it the index. So we're gonna use the color of the teams, and then we can simply set the color and opacity of our text. Right here, this is a structure, so I just splitted the structure to be able to connect the color. So I can just split the structure and then connect the color like so. Here we go. Now we can compile save, and if we go back in the designer, we should now have colors on our team numbers. Here we go. We now have nice colors. Great. And then in the construct, we're simply going to do a get actor of class to access the combat system, which I'm going to set inside a new variable. So combat system right here, we're doing a set on it. That way we can reuse it later on. But while we have the variable right here, I'm just going to connect myself to the onUnit teams change callback that we created. That way, every time the teams are going to change in the game, we're going to re-update the widget. So that's what we're going to do. OnUnit teams change, I'm connecting a custom event. And then since the logic to populate the grid is a little bit chunky, we're simply going to create a function for it. So new function, populate a unit teams grid, and then I'm going to call it in the event graph. So go back in the event graph and call it right after the callback right here. So that way, every time the units are going to update in the game, we're going to also update the widget. So here we go. And then we can do the logic of this function. And here are the function goes, and it's going to go pretty fast, so get ready. First step is to clear the children, because we already added some buttons in there, some unit icons. We want to clear them and start over, start fresh. So clear the children. Then the second step is to loop through all the buttons, the text that are above the grid. We have the numbers, we have the 0, 1, 2, 3 above the grid. We want to loop through all of them just to access the team index we are interested in, and that's what we're gonna do here. With a for each loop, I'm going to get my array index and put it inside an integer local variable right here that I have in my team. So now I know which team index I'm interested in. So here it is. And then what we're going to do is checking if we have units in that team. So if the combat system in my unit teams, if it contains the team index that we have right here in our loop, it means that there's unit in that team, and we want to display all those units inside the grid. Otherwise, we're not going to display the units. There's no units in there. So why adding some stuff for no reason? So we're just going to add the units when there's a unit in the team. And actually, more than that, when there's no units in the team, I'm just going to hide the text number that is written. So if there's no unit in the team 2, for example, we're gonna hide the number 2. Otherwise, we're gonna make them visible. So here it is. Now my text numbers are either visible or hidden, depending if there's a unit in the team. And if there's a unit in the team, well, we have to add all the units icon in the grid, and that's what we're gonna do. So right here, we're gonna get the unit set. So all the units that are in the team, we're gonna promote that inside an array. So here we go, to array. That way we can loop through it, because we can't loop through a set. So we have to convert it to an array first. It's a little bit annoying, but that's not a big deal. We convert it to an array, and now we can for each loop. So we can loop through all the units that are in our list, and for all of them, we're gonna create an icon and add it inside the grid. So let's do that. Create a widget right here, which is using the class button unit, which is the same widget that we used in the button list when we are selecting a unit, but this time we're not gonna select anything. We're just going to use it for display. So here it is. I'm creating my button. We should pass it the variable type, the unit type, so we can display the right icon. So feed it the unit type from the unit. Here we go. It's going to look right because my widget is on the left, so I would like it to look on the right, which is good. And it's not going to be selected because we're not gonna use it for selection. Here we go. So now we have our button. The last step is to add this button inside the grid, and we're gonna do that just like this with the add child to grid function. So with the grid, add child to grid, passing it the button, and then we have to specify which row and which column we want to use for that new button. For the row, we're gonna use the array index of the for each loop right here. So every unit is going to be one above the other in its team. So we have the unit, the team 0, and then we have the unit 1, unit 2, unit 3, unit 4, and that's what we're gonna do. So here is the row, and for the column, well, we have to use the team index. So for the column, it's going to be 0, 1, 2, 3, and then for the units, it's going to be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, depending on how many units you have. Okay, good. Now we should be able to compile and save and go see if it works in the game. So let's go there, play, and then we can test it. So I'm gonna add and remove some units. So let's add a unit right here. Okay, it's super big and it takes out the space. That's not good, but whatever, we'll see. I'm gonna add the slime right here. Okay, so I have 2 columns. Okay, now I'm using all 4 slots. Okay, that's interesting. And then a bat. Okay, good. And then I'm gonna add a ranger in team 2 just to see if it works. Here we go. It seems to work. And what if I change the team index of my unit? So I'm going to change everything to be in the 3rd team. So here we go. These are going to move in the 3rd team. Here we go. Here we go. It seemed to work. Everybody is now in the 3rd team. Good. But it's just that now it's like super big and it's not nice. So let's fix those things real quick and then we're gonna be done with today's video, I think. And the first thing we're gonna change is inside the unit button. So I'm gonna go in my units widget and open the button underscore unit. And here there's actually not much we have to do. We just have to right click on the border and wrap with a scale box. So scale box, which is going to let us decide how do we want to scale that button in the game. So here in the stretching in the top right corner, I'm going to change the stretch from scale to fit X only. Here we go, scale to fit X. Now we can compile and it should fix the bug that we had with the big buttons in the game. So let's add some units. Here we go. Now I have a square button. That's way better than the big button stretch button that we had before. So good. Now, if we add the units in the other teams, we can see that the buttons are adapting their sizes to fit all the teams in the grid. So that's a bit of an issue. They should always be that size from the start. They should always be super small because right now it's not the case and that's not good. So let's do that. We're just going to fix this also so they are all starting with the right size. And also the other thing that I'd like to fix is the team numbers right here. By default, everything is visible even though there's nothing in the team. So the numbers should be hidden by default. So let's go fix those real quick in the tab combat. And the first thing we're going to fix is the spacing between all the columns of our grid, and that's going to be in the designer. The reason why it happens is just because there's never anything in the grid right here. Nothing was added to the grid ever, and the grid is confused. It doesn't know what size it should be. So what we're going to do is just add some spacer in it. Spacers are just empty component that we can use to use some space in the widget, and it's going to help the grid generate the right sizes for all the columns. So I'm just going to take the spacer, put it inside my grid, and we can see by default it uses half the size of the grid. So that's not good. So let's duplicate it another time and then we can move it one slot away. We can see that now it uses the third of the grid size, and then one other time duplicate, move it away. Now it adapted themselves to 1/4 of the grid, and I'm just going to duplicate it one last time just to be sure. So now I have 4 spacers in my grid, so here, and here, and they are all using the right amount of space. And later on in the game when we play, they are going to be cleared. The first time we are doing a clear children on the grid, it's going to clear them, but the grid is going to keep its sizes just how it works for some reason. So that's good. And then the second thing we want to fix is the numbers of our teams right now. They are always visible at the beginning of the game before we are generating any teams. So what I'm going to do is just go in my graph, go in the event graph and call the populate unit teams on grid as soon as the widget is created. So now we are creating the widget and we are updating the grid. Perfect. Let's compile play. And then we can see, okay, first we don't see the numbers because all of our teams are empty, so that's good. And then if we add a unit in the team, so let's say a slime in the team 1, we can see that it uses the right amount of space. And now if we add other teams, other units in other teams, we can see that they are also using the right amount of space. So that's good. Good. So now the widget works as expected. Perfect. And actually, we should be done with today's video, but there's one last thing that I would like to do. It's completely optional. It doesn't matter really for the game, but in my case, let's say when I have units on the grid, I have my units here, my units there. Let's say it's gonna be easier to exploit with a bat, so I have a few bats here and there. So here we go. I have my 3 teams, and they are showing their colors using the HP bar. But in my case, I'm not sure I'd like to change the HP bar all the time. Maybe, maybe not. I don't know yet. So what I'm going to do instead is adding a square under the unit. So here I have a square which displays the selected tile, the over tile. So it displays the square under the unit. But the unit is also going to have a square under it that is going to display the color. So that one's going to have a red square under it. This one's going to have a green square. And that one's going to have a blue square. So that's what I'm going to add real quick before ending the video. It's completely optional. It's only if you want to do it. So let's go in the BP unit to do that. And here I'm going to start by adding myself a new mesh component. So static mesh right here, which I'm going to name mesh underscore team index. And the static mesh that is set on the mesh, it doesn't really matter because we're going to change it in the code. But for now, we can just set it to, let's say, flat square flat. Here we go. So now we have a square under the unit, and that's how it's going to look kind of. It's going to be bigger depending on the size of the grid. But yeah, that's the idea. And then it's a little bit flat on the ground right now, but I want it to be a little bit above the normal grid in the game. That way we're gonna see it. So what I'm gonna do is just change the location Z to be 10 instead of 0. So now it's a little bit above the ground and it should override the color of the grid that is under it. So here it is. I have my little square that we want to affect in the game, and we have to initialize the colors and everything, and we're gonna do that in the code. And the first place I'm gonna go is inside the set grid function. So right here and right here at the beginning, we are setting everything we need to set on the collision line of sight, which is the static mesh that follows the unit and follows the grid, and we want the same exact behavior for the mesh team index. So I'm gonna do the exact same thing more or less for the new mesh we just added. So I'm gonna go at the end right here just to do that logic right there. And we're gonna start the same way we did for the collision line of sight. So we fetch the shape data from the current grid. So if it is an hexagon, we're gonna use the hexagon. If it is a square, we're gonna use the square. And we're gonna set the static mesh. This time we're using the flat mesh and not the 3D shaped, because we just want to have a flat mesh on the ground right above the grid. So we are setting the static mesh, and also this time we want to set the material, because we are interested in the material. We want to display a different color based on the color of the theme. So we have to set the proper material, which is going to be the flat material right here. And still in the material category, where we also want to set the isFilled parameter to be 1. That way it's going to have colors also in the middle of the square, not only on the edges. So that's why we are setting the isFilled parameter right here. And after that, the next step is to set the transform of the tile. So what I'm going to do is the same thing as for the collision line of sight. So we first set it to absolute for the rotation and the scale, and then we can set the scale of that tile. So here it is. I'm doing a set world scale 3D based on the mesh size divided by the grid tile size. Here we go. So that's going to give us the right size for our mesh. And then we have the rotation to set. So here it is. This is mostly for the triangles, because it's possible that the triangle is not in the right orientation. So we're just going to get the rotation of the tile based on the index, and then we are setting the world rotation of the square that is under the unit. And the last thing I want to do right here is to re-update the relative location of our tile, because I always want to make sure that this tile is above the grid. So that's why I'm doing it right here. I'm getting the grid offset from ground, which is the height between the grid and the ground, and then above that we're gonna add a little bit of an offset, so 5 units, let's say. So the tile, the colored tile of the unit theme is going to be right above the grid, 5 units above it. So good, that's done. And now we just have 2 last little things to do. First is to readapt the rotation of the tile every time the unit changes tile, the same way we did for the collision line of sight. So what I'm going to do is just do a find references on the collision line of sight and click on the one that is in set grid index right here. So we are setting the world rotation of that collision component. So I'm going to do the same thing for the mesh. So I'm going to drag it in the graph and connect it to the same set world rotation. So it's going to update both rotations at the same time. And the last thing we have to do is to actually set the color on the static mesh, because right now we're never doing it. So it's always going to be the default color, and that's not what we want. So let's go do that. And we're going to do that at the same place we did for the HP bar. So inside the set the theme index function right here, we are setting the color of the progress bar. So we're going to do the exact same thing, but for the mesh this time. So get the mesh theme index, do a set vector parameter value on materials, passing it the color from the get theme color, and that should be it. We should now have a nice square under the units, and that should conclude today's video. So let's go see how it looks. Here we go. So now when we are adding units in the game, we can see that they now have a different color under them. So it's easier to spot which unit is in which team. So here it is. Now that's perfect. And we're done with the team indexes and things like that. So now we're going to be ready to do something more interesting in the next video. But that's it for this one. So I'm going to see you in the next one. Bye bye.